You ever find yourself going through your dad's attic or your old toys as a kid and you find your old Lionel train set and you really want to take and get it out and run it again? Well, 9 times out of 10 you're going to put those things on the track and you're going to find that they either don't run well, don't run properly, or don't run at all. Well, today in this video I'm going to show you how to properly service and long-term maintain a Lionel post-war diesel switcher. Now what I have here in front of me is a 1961 Lionel post-war Santa Fe 616 diesel switcher. Again, offered in 1961. As you can see, this one is in decent condition for its age. Minimal rust on the frame. Pretty clean shell overall. It's got a little bit of dust on it. It shows its age well. And it was put onto the test track. It was found that it runs. It doesn't run great. And we're going to take and we're going to show you, for those of you that have never done this before, how to open one of these up, what to look for, what to service, how to maintain these engines, so that way on your own you can take and do these yourself, because they're not really that hard to work on. They're very easy to work on, and I actually enjoy working on them, and I've done some work before for friends of mine and just people in the past, and they seem to enjoy it and they wish they could work on it. And I'm frequently asked how to take and work on these types of things. So I'm going to take and show you how to open one of these up, service them, and then you can enjoy your old Lionel trains for many more years to come, just like you did as a kid or with your dad, and you can do it with your grandkids, kids, and so forth. So first things first on this engine is we're going to take and remove the shell, which is pretty straightforward. On the long hood end of the locomotive, there is a Phillips screw located here, and Phillips screwdriver, you're going to take and unscrew the screw and remove the shell, which in this case I have a magnetic screwdriver. Then you're going to slide the shell up, forward, pull it off, and now your shell is removed. And inside your locomotive, you're going to find a plethora of things. You have your Postwar motor right here. Your light bulb socket is right here. Your electronic reversing unit is here. And then back here is going to be your horn and battery compartment for a set horn. And as you can tell on this one, it doesn't have a battery in it, and it actually is very clean inside of here, all things considered. Usually people will forget to take the batteries out of these, and you will find that the batteries have leaked inside of the locomotive. You can cause frame damage, you can destroy components, you can do all sorts of things in here that can take and destroy the condition of your locomotive long term. So if you plan on not running these in the long term, take your batteries out so as to not damage your engine. Now, as I also forgot to mention, this is actually your horn relay. That's what, when you take and activate the horn function on these post-war engines, actually sets the horn off. But we're not going to talk about any of this down here. We're not going to talk about the E-unit, which is how your engine goes forward and backward. We're going to talk about up here, which is your Postwar magnet traction motor. And what will happen is in these is that Lionel will grease them from the factory, and after 40, 50 years or longer, or even less, that grease, which is lithium based, can dry out and get hard. And if you don't change that grease or clean that grease out, you can burn up your engine. You can just simply wreck a lot of things in there that otherwise would be very easy to replace, renew, clean, etc. Don't run your engine very long. If you haven't serviced it, you will be doing it more harm than good, and it will cause you more frustration, more problems, more headache in the long run. So we're going to take the brush plate off, which is on the top of your motor, and it holds your brushes, which is what takes and turns your armature. and then turns your wheels. So we're going to take the brush plate off and service our engine. And that can be done with a small flathead screwdriver. Up here and down here is a flathead screw on each end. And you're going to remove these screws and then slowly bend the brush plate out of the way. And from there, we will take and access the internals of the motor. Okay, now that we have the screws removed, over here is your engine's, your motor's ground. You're going to bend that out of the way. Your leads to your brushes. And your contact for your headlight, which we don't have, and we will get to that at another time. You're going to move these ever so slightly out of the way, and then sometimes it might take a little persuasion. You're going to gently pull up on your brush plate. Slow and steady wins the race. Don't force things if you can avoid it. And pull that off to the side. Now in this case, my brushes did not fall out of the brush plate. We're going to first instead look at our armature, which when you watch the engine run with the shell off will be the device that inside the motor spins, which has your worm gear on it, which is connected to your powered truck and will turn the wheels and make the engine go forward or backward. And to simply remove that, you just grab it ever so slightly. Here, I'll do it so you can view it. Grab it and then just lift. And as you can see by looking at this, number one, as you can tell by my hands, this thing is dirty. It needs to be cleaned. Number two, there is little to no lubricant left on this gear. You can tell at one point it did have some, but it has since evaporated, dried out, etc. And it is time to add some fresh grease and oil to the locomotive. So first things first, though, we're going to take and look inside, and we're going to find that same thing again. There is, I know you can't see that very well, but inside here there is a gear and several gears that I can't really do so well. Yeah, there we go. There's several gears inside that lead directly down to your wheels that power the locomotive. These can be lubricated with a simple needle oiler. I prefer Labelle 108 synthetic multi-purpose oil. Plastic compatible. Even if you're lubricating newer trains with plastic gears, do not get something that will destroy your gearing. More often than not, some people will bring in their stuff after they've worked on it and come to find out they put oil into their locomotives that were not meant for it, and it completely dissolves the plastic gearing. Do not use any regular old lubricant or oil. Look specifically for oils designed for model trains and other things forth. Again, this is a plastic compatible oil. We're not going to be worrying so much about that, because obviously the gears in this locomotive are metal, so that won't apply to this. But going forth, if you're going to be using oil to lubricate your trains, use a plastic compatible oil. My fingers are getting dirty and greasy from this. Now, obviously, a dirty armature is not going to do very well at conducting your electricity. So even if some people like to take and just spray contact cleaner into the motor and the gears and everything like that, contact cleaner works, but also will take and remove any oil, grease, lubricant, whatever that there may be inside the locomotive, and it might do more harm than good. Not exactly your best friend in a situation like this. I do not recommend using contact cleaner in this case. And if people say to use contact cleaner, Don't do it. It's the easy way out. It's not going to be a long-term solution. It doesn't work. I actually had somebody use too much contact cleaner on something and caught the locomotive on fire. So again, do not use contact cleaner in a situation where you know you need to open up the locomotive and service the internals. So we're going to clean the armature off. We're going to use what is called a bright boy, or you can use a Dremel or anything that has a cleaning or polishing attachment on the tool. I prefer to use something that's handheld because obviously you can't overdo it with your hands and you just have more control. So I'm going to take and clean the armature off on the coil side as well as the contact where the brushes make contact. And then we are going to add grease and reinstall. So I'm going to take and get this cleaned off, and then we'll proceed to the brushes and the brush plate. Okay, now we've cleaned off our armature. And as you can tell, it's not completely clean, but it's much better, much cleaner. There's a little bit of oxidation on here. That's okay. That's not going to take and affect us too much. Our contact surface for where our brushes will be is much cleaner. It does show some signs of wear, but that's okay. It won't really affect it. If this is completely worn down, worn through, if there's heavy corrosion or whatever, you have to replace it. If your windings are burnt or coming apart, you have to replace it. You can get them rewound. I don't necessarily think it's worth it, but you can get them rewound. Not a big deal. Anything on these locomotives is replaceable, renewable, serviceable, anything of that sort. But this one is going to be okay for our needs. And for now, until we need it, I'm going to set it aside. And we are going to now look at our brushes inside of our brush plate. And the brushes are what puts power from your locomotive. Well, I shouldn't necessarily say that. What basically gets the locomotive to spin in a way by making a current that then spins the armature on the locomotive. Now, as you can tell, these have a lot of grease and oil in them from somebody who decided to not properly lubricate these. So removing them can sometimes be fun, and in this case, these are being a little bit on the stubborn side. So we're going to get, first of all, we're going to wipe some of this grease off my fingers. And then after we get the grease off, again, don't force these things if you can avoid it. In this case, I'm going to just gently push out of the bottom, not to bend the little brass fingers inside of the armature plate. Those are your brush springs. If you bend these too much or damage them, you will have to replace them, and you can get those. It's just more work involved in the replacement process. And I happen to knock the brushes down on this side of the locomotive. And we're going to take a look at these to see what the condition is that they are in. And honestly, I must say that these brushes are in decent shape. I don't know how well you can see here, but they are in decent shape. Mostly just a little bit greasy, a little bit oily, nothing that can't be fixed or cleaned. I'd use anything from some rubbing alcohol to just scrubbing them by hand to whatever to get this stuff off. Very simple process. And I'm gonna go take and clean those up so that way we can take and reinstall them in the brush plate, and I will show you my method for doing that the most easiest and simplest way possible. So I'll be right back, and I'm gonna go clean these brushes up. And again, if you do need to replace these. These are available. There are different styles of brushes that you can take and get, and not all of them will work for a locomotive that you are rebuilding. There are longer ones, shorter ones, etc. Make sure that you have the right size brushes for that, what you need, so that way when you do get the right brushes, you're not set back waiting for the right parts to arrive or just anything of the sort that may take and slow down what can be described as maybe a half-hour long to an hour-long process, depending on how new at this you are and how well you know to do these things. But I'm gonna go clean these brushes up, and then we will get into the greasing and then the reassembly of the motor. Okay, now we have our brushes cleaned up, and as you can tell, they look much nicer. They're not perfectly shiny or new, but they're clean. I polished the ends so that way they have a nice clean surface for when they go back into the brush plate, and they should be good to go. Now, if you reassemble everything and you find that the locomotive is still very underpowered, sluggish, etc., even if they don't look bad, those brushes can generally be a problem. Just replace them. There's no harm in that. They're super cheap. I think they're maybe not even $1 for one, or they're like $1.50, maybe $2 for a set. And to show you the difference between a new brush and an old one, which again, these are not exactly the correct brushes. I believe they are a little bit longer, but they probably could work. Here is a brand new set of one out of my parts, and you can tell the difference here, especially, I mean, they have a little bit of wear on them because the length's a little bit shorter, but there's a difference between a brand new set and an old set. For the case of this, I'm going to keep the old ones and use them, and shouldn't be an issue. If they end up being an issue, then I will come back and replace them, but for now we are going to stick with the old brushes, and instead we're going to move on to grease. Now, some people still swear by the old white lithium grease. I'm not a fan of it because, as has been demonstrated in over the years, is that the grease can dry out, get hard, it doesn't last. And anymore, they make greases that hold up way better in the long run. And the grease that I usually use is a synthetic grease. It is, in my experience, the only grease that really should be used. Not saying that you can't have your preferences, whatever, be it. But I use Labelle 106 grease. It is a microlube grease that is enhanced, and it's the slickest substance, quote, known to man, as they say on the bottle. And in my experience, this stuff works better than a traditional white lithium grease. Don't use just any grease that you can in these, because some greases will eat certain materials. So only use certain recommended greases. My recommendation is Labelle 106. It's great stuff. It holds up, and it's got, I would say, the consistency of like a thinner, like a hand lotion is probably what I would say that it would be like. Now, we're gonna add some grease in here, and my tube might be running a little bit low, so bear with me. I was debating whether or not to get new grease before this video or not. And all we are going to simply do is down in the, if I can keep the armature plate out of the way, down in the truck, you can see right in front of the gear there's a little hole, and inside that hole is a bearing. And next to that bearing is the gear that is connected to the truck, and that's what the worm gear connects up with. I'm going to stick a little bit of grease in that hole because that is the armature bearing, and then I'm going to stick a little bit on the gear as well as the worm gear on the armature, and that is really about all you should need. You do not need to cake the entire interior of this with grease. You do not need to go overboard. Yes, you can over grease something, as much as some people might want to agree or disagree, but in this case, especially because if you can't tell that the truck is open, all you need to do is put a little bit of grease down in the bottom and it will work wonders. If you over grease it, it's going to be a mess and it's going to be more work than what you need to do. Only use the amount of grease that you need to. And I am going to now add this grease, and then once we put the grease in, and I will show you how much grease that I've put in, we will move on to the reassembly phase. Okay, now I apologize that I wasn't able to get a very good view of this, but we have grease now inside the gearbox in the motor. We have covered it adequately around the gear itself as well as in the armature bearing. And we now have grease on the end of our armature shaft as well. And we're going to put this back inside of our locomotive, which is pretty simple. Basically the same way that we took it out. We place it inside, and then, there we go. Make sure you line up that shaft. And now, if you notice, when you twist it, the locomotive ever so slightly moves because it's connected to the worm gear. And then to reinstall our brushes, the easiest way I do it is to simply reinsert our brushes back in the way they came out. And you might have to twist them to... I just broke a solder joint. Oh well. Fail on my part. Line up our brushes. As you can tell, the underside of this brush plate is still rather dirty. Line up our brushes with our brush springs. Then we reinstall. There we go. And if those brushes aren't exactly lined up, that's okay. Just take a screwdriver and twist until it's lined up, and simply slide your spring over. So, as you can now see, move that wire out of the way for a second. As you can see, our brushes are lined up in the springs. Our screws holes are lined up because they're sitting on the studs. Freshly greased motor. Freshly cleaned armature. And then what I usually do at the end is I take our oiler, add a small drop on top of the armature shaft, so that way that shaft is lubricated in the armature plate. I'm drawing a blank right now, but then obviously repeat the process as before in reverse. Take and screw down brush plate. That's what I meant to say before, not armature plate. Apologize if I'm mixing any of this up. And don't obviously over tighten these. Don't use power tools, use hand tools. You'll get more precise with your work. You do not need to crank these things down to where they're so ungodly tight. You can crack these armature plates. They are, or brush plates, excuse me. I keep saying armature plate. I mean, you can replace them, but if you're cracking these because you're over tightening them, then that's on you. So This is your ground, by the way. Make sure your ground is screwed in. And then you're all set to go. Now, I did break a wire right here. I'm going to be right back. I'm going to solder that back on to our locomotive, so that way when we go to test it, that everything works properly. And if we don't know how to solder, that's okay. It's really simple. And if you would like me to do a video on how to solder, I can obviously do that as well, or I may or may not just do one anyway, because soldering is not as difficult as it may seem. A lot of people are intimidated by it, but it's really, really simple, and it will allow you to do so many things. But in the meantime, I will be right back. I'm going to go solder our wire, and then we will reassemble our shell, and we will test our locomotive. Okay, now we've made that very quick repair for that broken wire that led to the brush plate. And as we quickly have found, our locomotive works just fine. E-unit even cycles nicely. Usually those are a problem. Sometimes we have to take and service those, but looks like we're all good. So we're gonna go back and take and put this locomotive together and finish this project off. Now, of course, really the only thing left to do with this job is to take and reinstall our shell back on our locomotive. And normally I would take and show the light bulb install. I do not have one of these right now, so I need to go to my local hobby shop and pick one up, because I also have this locomotive and a MPC CP bump car that needs the same style bulb. It takes a 2-pin bulb that they're kind of oblong in shape. They don't screw in. They're not a bayonet style. They started using these later on in the post-war era, but this one has a 2-pin base bulb, and I don't have one right now. So for now, because it's so easy to take and get inside of these, I'm just going to simply put the shell back on. And a note too, especially in particular with these, you do not need to tighten these things down so much to the point to where they aren't going to move or going to come off or whatever, because this one I actually did the repair on. This is a very common thing. If you can't tell, there is a crack here. This little piece breaks off because people will over tighten this screw, and you do not need to do that. Simply just, you know, very, very minimal tightening is needed for these. They're not going to come off. They're not going to go anywhere. You know, these things make buzzing, they make rattles, they do whatever. They're going to make noise. So you don't need to over tighten these things, because if not, they will break. This one I did manage to glue back because it hadn't fallen away yet, so that way it does properly hold the shell on. So these are tight fit. If you can't tell inside the shell, you'll see where they rub. So they are a bit of a tight fit. So all you have to do is make sure that our little bracket in the cab, put the notch on, make sure all of our wires are, of course, inside the shell. And then push it on down. Make sure we have no wires showing, which we don't. And then take your screw, which, again, magnetic screwdriver does wonders for this. And then simply put it back in our hole. Oops, there it goes. And then, actually I probably over tightened that one a little bit myself. So I'm gonna back that off just a little bit. And there you go. All serviced, all ready to go. Runs beautifully. I'm sure it'll pull magnificently. It's got that magnet traction. And you know, depending on how efficiently and quickly you go through this. I mean, I probably got this done in less than 30 minutes. This applies for F units, center cap switchers, anything of this era from Lionel, even up into the MPC era. They basically were just reissuing these throughout the 70s and stuff, with a few modern add-ons and some variations. But the motors are basically the exact same thing. Even up into the 90s, some of these locomotives were still using these Magnetraction equipped Pullmore motors. So super reliable, super dependable, super easy to work on, and will run forever if you maintain them properly. And when you know how to do one, you know how to do all of them. So it's very straightforward, very simple, and as long as you, in my book anyway, routinely exercise these things, so even if you run them for a few minutes to keep the grease moving and stuff like that, they will go a long way. And another thing too, before we end this, is I'm not going to show this because it's too tedious, but take your oiler and flip your locomotive over, and I already did this on this, but go through and oil every moving piece on these trucks. So whether it would be the sides of the rollers, where your axles meet into your truck frames, anything that basically contributes with the moving of the locomotive, especially up here in the power truck, you know, oil your gears, stuff of that nature. Anything that could possibly add any resistance or get worn down if it doesn't have oil, oil it. I even seen on some of these a trick that an older guy taught me, because the oil eventually will wear out or evaporate or run down. Another one that works really good in this case that I've seen guys use is transmission fluid. That will take and also work. Of course, that's if you're doing a lot, because you can get a big amount of transmission fluid compared to this little oiler right here. But that's if you're using it on metal only on these older trains. Do not use transmission fluid with plastic. It will eat the plastic more than likely. So that's mostly for, you know, the pre-war stuff, a lot of the older post-war, where everything's metal, brass, etc. You can get away with using transmission fluid, especially if your trains are sitting for a bit, because it doesn't evaporate. So works good for that. And you know, if you're gonna do any more cleaning on the exterior of these with these shells and the frames, mild soap and water. Don't scrub too hard. You can wash the decals away. I've seen, you know, instances of people washing the paint right off of their units. So you don't need to take and do that. That's a little excessive. This one, I required some mild wiping. Other than that, it turned out beautifully. It's going to run great, and whoever ends up with it next will surely enjoy it, whether it's sitting still or whatever, and should run beautifully for the foreseeable future. So hopefully this video has helped anybody out who aspires to work on these, or, you know, they find their dad's or their childhood train or their grandpa's train and they want to get it going again and they don't know how. And, you know, I mean, if it needs a total rebuilding, obviously send it out to somebody who is well equipped and acclimated with these to work on them. If you want to just service it, go from there and see if that helps. You know, you can easily do it yourself, and this is case in point. But, you know, these things are real fun to work on. I've worked on many now over the last couple years, and I've done it for other people. And, you know, a little bit of grease and oil will go a long way with these, and a little bit of cleaning, and that's about all you really need for these. They're pretty much bulletproof. So unless they've been like in water and they're covered in rust underneath the shell, you should be perfectly fine just doing a simple servicing on these. And if you need parts, like I said, they're really cheap. And if you're going to do these long term, I have two books that I would recommend getting. One of them, I'm going to move this out of the way, is this one, which the camera is turned, so I'm going to turn this up. One of these books I would recommend getting is the Greenberg's Repair and Operating Manual for Lionel Trains, 1945 to 1969. And the other one is Complete Service Manual for Lionel Trains. This one's the one that K-Line did. I have both because one book sometimes has a little bit more than the other, but, you know, you can go through and look up, you know, anything for freight car diagrams to, you know, any type of accessory, you know, I mean, any accessory that was made in this era, whether it be accessories, locomotives, track layouts, wiring diagrams, you know, same thing here for like a transformer. I mean, there's anything and everything in these switches. In fact, actually, if I go in this book to page, I think it's 56. Yes. No, not 56. 54. This is the wiring diagram for, on the left, is for this switcher that I just worked on. Literally how the thing is wired up and how everything works. Stupid simple, really easy to work on. A lot of great illustrations in these that'll help you out. If you need to know about certain types of parts, you know, same thing, like say if you have a transformer that's got some broken parts, there's part numbers in here that you can take and still use to order stuff today. These parts are still made for most of these accessories. So they're really easy to come by for the most part and just find, and so that way you know what you need and what you're looking for, because the last thing anybody wants to do is order parts that don't work or don't fit for what you need. So, but anyway, hopefully thanks to this video you guys know how to successfully maintain and lubricate and clean a Postwar Lionel diesel switcher. And you know, now you can go out and maintain and lubricate and service your own locomotives, whether it be for you, yourself, a growing collection, a family member, whatever it may be. They're really simple, really easy to work on. And any of the products, you know, that I've mentioned in the video will work for you, and any of the parts that you need or might need, you know, they're just online and you can find that stuff. I recommend Train Tender, Henning's Trains on eBay, Train Z, so literally it's trains with a Z. They have a lot of parts, done business with all three of them in the past. You know, they do good stuff, they do good work, and they have all the parts that you could ever want and ever need for any of these post-war machines. So pre-war is a little bit of a different story. MPC largely uses post-war era parts, so most of that stuff will work for the MPC era stuff, which is 70s and 80s. So pre-war is a different story, but post-war stuff, all the parts are readily available and out there, and you can find them and work on these things and keep them going forever. And that's why so many guys, including myself, love these things to death. They're great, they're fun, and you can never get enough of them. So, but I'm gonna wrap this up. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video, and like, comment, and subscribe. I'll take and do some more of these in the future, and hope you all enjoyed it. So